Yeah, sure.
Mr. Speaker, we think rappers like Eminem have more in common with people who have undergone difficult struggles in their life, as opposed to, say, rappers like Nicki Minaj, who have been born with silver spoons in their mouth and don't really relate to the sort of struggles of the people they claim to represent. Over the course of my speech, I'm going to talk to you about 4 ideas. First, about how minority cultures are multifaceted and do not only arise out of and with respect to the historic subjugation of that particular group. Second, about how celebrities from minority communities have little in common with the people they claim to represent in most cases. Third, about how when celebrities from majority communities do adopt these cultures, it leads to a normalization and an equalization of cultures, which is much needed. And finally, about how this move seeks to infringe upon individuals' freedoms to enter into certain industries or certain spheres of work. Coming to our first construct, we want to ask side government what exactly they consider culture to be, because we don't think culture is confined to a static set of individuals along arbitrary lines such as race, which are increasingly becoming blurred in a very cosmopolitan world, especially in countries such as the United States, where this debate is set. We think that culture is a way of living, and we don't think it should be confined to a set of people. It should be dynamic and should expand to involve the sort of changes that occur in the way these people live their lives, or even expand to other people who may adopt this way of life, or who may find that they have more in common with the first set of people who first came up with this culture or first started to evolve. We think that it's important to look at how we have progressed so far from the civil rights movement. We do have to concede that, say, for example, there are a lot of problems that blacks currently face in America, that the African American community does face brutality at the hands of the police, and that they aren't equally represented in, say, political structures. We do think, however, that we have come a long, long way, and that a lot of generations have passed since that generation that actually saw the struggles, the fighting, the laws that oppressed this community directly and horrifically. And we think things are different now, and the fact that we can have a discourse about the way they are being mistreated and clamor for change proves that things have come a long way. So then for them to say from side government that black rappers in the 21st century have actually seen these struggles and have a lot in common, and are the only legitimate people to represent these struggles is false, because they are often people who have come from very rich families, or people who have been born into this industry and have not had to struggle or make their way through the ghetto to make their name big or be able to be successful in these industries. We think then we need to look at rappers such as, say, Eminem, who have lived very troubled childhoods, who have gotten through poverty and have gotten through domestic abuse to rise to the sort of platform they have. We think then to say that rap or hip-hop is the exclusive sphere of people from minority cultures is to ignore the fact that people from other communities could also have gone through similar experiences, and to say that they simply can't opt into these sort of facets of this culture simply because it has been seen as something that arose out of the black struggle is false. We think for that reason that people from majority communities are well placed to buy into these ideas or buy into these sort of activities that are seen as exclusively part of the minority cultural domain. But finally, we tell you that when celebrities, but also why it is not multifaceted, is that when we give you examples of, say, Miley Cyrus twerking, we don't think twerking is something that is related to the black struggle for civil rights. We don't think the way, say, the African American community dresses, or the fact that they are viewed as seen as people who wear their pants in a certain way, or who get tattoos, or who wear their hair in a certain way, has anything to do with the civil rights struggle. We agree that perhaps some areas of music were initially invented to talk about these struggles, but we think it's simply false to say that everything to do with black culture is a result of that struggle. And for that reason, we don't think that only people of that community are best placed to represent it, and that it's easy for other people to opt into it and legitimately use these facets. But finally, we tell you that celebrities from majority communities adopting these cultures is a good thing, right? Because we think for too long, minority cultures, and say, for example, black culture, has been confined to a very particular disenfranchised space in society. It has been seen as improper, that people that dress a certain way, or walk a certain way, or talk a certain way aren't professional, that you can't dress that way in a workplace, that you can't be seen as respected as a professional individual if you look like that. We think that when you allow for these cultures to permeate these barriers, when you allow for people who are seen as respected, successful white celebrities to adopt these cultures, you normalize the idea of a successful individual, of a professional individual being a part of this culture or adopting these cultural aspects. We think that's a good thing, because for too long, the white Victorian idea of how you should dress or walk or talk has been hegemonic and has dominated cultural narratives and has told the minority cultures that they must change their ways to be able to enter these spheres of professionalism. Before I come on to my final constructive, I'll take a question from Rosie.
Twerking and stereotyped body types of African American women today have roots in discriminatory beauty standards back when it was the time of slavery. Can you still say that these discriminatory cultures that people experience are very accessible to all and everyone should be able to access them?
The point we're trying to make is that there's such a huge generation gap between the people who actually went through those struggles and say a black rapper like Nicki Minaj today who might twerk, that she probably won't even know about these roots. So to say that she's doing it to legitimize that cause or to raise her voice in support of that cause or to bring awareness to the Black civil rights movement is ridiculous, because nobody associates it with that. So you aren't sending out any sort of message of the struggle that the Blacks face when you do these things that are no longer associated with the civil rights movement and are not even and have no obvious link to that struggle. But finally, sorry, we think that this is an unacceptable infringement on individual freedom, because they cannot come here and tell us from side government that there are certain spheres of the music industry or there are certain ways of dressing and there are certain ways of speaking that are exclusively allowed to one set of people. Because we think that there do exist talented white rappers, talented white hip-hop artists, and to say that they should be denied legitimacy and entry into these spheres of the industry, to mock artists like Justin Bieber or Miley Cyrus or Iggy Azalea for trying to enter into this industry and accusing them of trying to buy into a culture that they are not a part of is unfair, because these are legitimate avenues for them to express their talents and to earn revenue. And we think for all of these reasons, we are very proud to oppose.
I thank the leader of the opposition for his speech, and now I invite the Deputy Prime Minister to make remarks.
We believe it's perfectly fine in the world we live in. Why, Honourable Speaker? When they say that minorities are to be represented and cannot infringe on rights, then we should also accept the fact that minorities should be able to represent majorities in these fields as well, right? But that doesn't necessarily happen under their side, right? They told us about a freedom, but this freedom is false, Honourable Speaker, because minorities can never enjoy that freedom. And Salih has clearly mentioned how the acceptance procedures work, and they failed to counter that idea. And I will further reaffirm to show you what he said in this House really did matter in the very first place. But before we move on, a few rebuttals I want to mention. First of all, they talked about how culture should not be something we confine. It's not something we're going to confine, right? We're just going to prevent a celebrity to represent a culture that they're not from, that they cannot fully represent, something that they create an a biased acceptance of, or a not proper representative of. But any individual, we believe, can live any sort of cultural life they want. It's about, when it comes down to representation from the celebrity status, is that we're going to infringe your right upon. And that is where this debate actually takes place, on the speaker. So they came up and talked about the whole idea of normalization, but they never really mentioned how the normalization procedures really work. How is the cultural values really accepted? Does the minorities culture really get educated towards the people? We believe these are important questions that should have been answered by the opening, which they did not. They just simply mentioned that it's a normalized thing to do. But here, Sadiq already mentioned how the acceptance procedure really works, right? You don't really accept the minority culture. You just see something that's an extension to your dominant culture, because you need someone from your dominant culture to represent a minority culture. So you're creating a version of that specific minority culture from a dominant majority culture perspective, right? So at the very end, when Eminem goes and rap, it becomes a white rapper, right? Nobody thinks about him as a rapper in the very first place. That's a problem in its own, honestly, because you're accepting the idea and looking at Eminem because he's that unique representation you have. But in the end, what happens is it fades out the other proper representations that happens from the culture end, which never gets highlighted, which never are viewed. There are so many great rappers like Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, but in comparison to how much reception Eminem gets, in comparison to how much reception Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre gets, is a huge disparity of its own, right? Because they're adopting a culture that is brought to you by Eminem, right? Not brought for something that can be represented by Dr. Dre or Snoop Dogg in the very end. No, man. So at the very least, what happens is that you don't accept that culture, but you accept it as something that comes from an extension of the dominant culture in the very first place. And then what happens when there's a misrepresentation? We believe at that misrepresentation, that is when they highlight where the root source of this culture is on the speaker. When Miley Cyrus tries to represent the idea of hairy feminists or hairy women in general, and they try to adopt that minority concept, we believe at that moment there could be a lot of misrepresentation in the very first place, because these celebrities are not the perfect representation in the very first place, because they're judged a lot, right? They're judged from the majority's perspective. So whenever they call a misrepresentation a failure by adopting a culture, and those failures have come with some repercussions, right? We believe the stigmatization on the minorities increase much more when they fail to succeed in the celebrity status by adopting those ideas, and then it falls under those minorities to take in the blame of what the celebrity has failed to do by adopting their culture and their very end on the speaker. We believe that itself is a problem when it comes down to how acceptance works, and these are the problems the opposition is yet to deal with and tell us how this would be a much more better representation, or how by looking Justin Bieber, suddenly you will also start listening to other black rappers or other rappers who are of the same age of Justin Bieber and are capable like him, right? Because at the end, it doesn't really work that way. That thing necessarily fades out people from the other faction, which I will further elaborate in my extension. But before I move on, yes, sure.
A lot of prominent black rappers today rap about things like women and cars and money. Do you think that's representative of the majority black community?
See, that's the thing, right? We believe that no matter what they rap about, it's fine. Because white people also do the same thing as the black people do. But in the end, the perception of how they're think of is different, right? See, from that POI, something is clearly evident. When we listen to black rappers, we have a different perception now. Because they're black rappers. But when we listen to Eminem, oh no, he's trying to. What we see is another version of how we perceive the rap. Because now it's not, we don't judge him on that basis of that he's a black. We judge him that he's a majority in line with our culture. And then we don't really judge the aspects and the cultural values that Eminem tries to bring forward from that black culture he tries to adopt. So in the end, there is no win to this. But we believe even under the circumstances where black people try to represent their culture, we believe it is still better under our side. Why I want to speak it? Because true that there might be some deviations, but they are people from that class. They are people who live that culture to begin with, not someone who comes from majority ideals or something like that. He is basically judged on being in line with that culture in the very first place on those speakers. So we believe we see a true representation of that culture and its people at the same time in the very first place. But when we have that from a majority dominant person, we believe at that moment that idea doesn't really pass on at that very much. Because he didn't live the same phases as those people, and that culture value that he's trying to pass on comes in an interpretation of a majority culture and doesn't really come to the interpretation of that minority culture to begin with. So here's what the debate really comes down to. We believe other rappers or people in the same minority culture trying to represent their culture gets phased out by the majority culture in the very first place. Because when the majority culture tries to adopt an idea and they represent it, we believe it phases out the representatives from that minority culture who tries to bring it forth. Because the people who are adopting this culture get most of the attention, and the attention doesn't really pass on to those people who are in that minority culture and trying to promote it in their own idea. It just goes to the example of why Eminem is still perceived as the best rapper, or a rapper who's better in comparison to other black rappers in America, and we believe African rappers in America, and we believe that is a problem in the very first place. You're phasing out the popularity, and you're phasing out the representative from trying to even come up and represent their culture in the very first place, and these people are taking over. And at the very end, what happens in society, on the speaker? We believe that when we want to represent a culture and normalize the idea, it's better we allow the proper representatives to do it in the very first place. Because when you do it from majority dominant people try to do it, we believe they consume the culture rather than represent the culture in the very first place, and it doesn't really work out. It is how to propose.
I invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to wrap up the Upper debate here.
Mr. Speaker, over the course of my speech, I'm going to talk to you about the normalization of African American culture and why that's very important in society to break down the sort of prejudices that exist against African Americans. But before I do that, I have certain points of rebuttal. First, we challenge their characterization of how culture works. Right? They said, we agree that culture may have evolved out of historical struggles, but let me point out, opening government at no point explained how culture evolves out of historical struggles or why it is so intrinsically linked to those historical struggles that can't evolve. That only came out through a POI in itself, and I'm going to tell you why the POI is actually in our favor and why that can be accounted for as a benefit, right? But opening government has clearly failed to fulfill their burden, right? We say, okay, fine, even if certain aspects of culture may have evolved out of historical struggles, it doesn't mean that the culture should, for infinity, be linked to those historical struggles and that it cannot evolve to account for new messages and different messages. Another burden that opening government never fulfilled and merely asserted, right? Today, we tell you that the culture should not be limited to these people who have been through the suffering, as opening government would have you believe, for several reasons. What are the responses that you've seen from opening opposition? A, because you limit that culture and you prevent it from ever being normalized. Something I will explain to you when I get to my constructives, but Isha has already simply explained it to you already. Right? B, this doesn't account for the fact that the message of oppression can continue to exist. The culture today is distinct from this message. And as long as the message isn't being co-opted, it isn't being harmed. And therefore, when a white individual adopts African American culture, they aren't also adopting the African American position on, say, slavery or civil rights. They aren't coming out and saying, I'm going to wear these clothes, and now I'm going to wear these clothes to destroy your message about these particular things. And therefore, we think that there is a distinction between the message and the culture. As long as that message is not being co-opted, we don't see any harm coming out from their side, right? Just because twerking may be linked to the idea, and in this I'm going to respond to that POI, just because twerking may be linked to the idea of African American women's body types, does not mean that when the message that all women are beautiful is required to be sent, it's somehow going to be lost because Miley Cyrus starts twerking. If anything, we think that message is benefited because you have a white, thin woman who is spreading this message and trying to say that it is acceptable. Twerking that was an activity that was carried out by African American women or is linked to their body types can be carried out by me. That our body types are all the same, that there should not be this distinction. And when she uses her social currency of being this rapper or being this celebrity who's seen by everyone and being white and is therefore accepted by white people, we tell you that she can spread this message and normalize that culture, which we think is extremely beneficial, right? We told you that African American rappers also use this culture without any link to the message that they would have you believe, right? Isha told you in her POI that African American rappers, what do they rap about today 99% of the time? They rap about sex, they rap about money, they rap about guns. We tell you that none of those things are essentially linked to the civil rights struggle or to the struggle against slavery or any other historical aspect they would have you believe. Which clearly means that the culture is distinct from the message and can exist without that message. We therefore tell you that it is okay for that culture to be used to spread other messages which people think are important for them, right? This is our third level of response to their argument. We tell them that it is presumptuous to say that someone from a cultural majority cannot relate to that minority culture. And we gave you the example of Eminem, right? He grew up on the streets amongst African American people. He felt his struggles and he wanted to express them in the way that he thought would best represent his position on those struggles. And he felt that rap was the correct way to express his pains. We tell you they have not given us any reason why there is a harm accruing out of this, and we've given you a strong benefit, right? A particular culture can be normalized and be used by individuals to express themselves and to represent their own struggles. We don't think that they have given you any reason why the black culture cannot represent other problems. In fact, rap is used by Macklemore to talk about homosexual problems in the song Save Love. Rap is used by Eminem to talk about the problems of family life and domestic abuse in songs like Stan or in songs like Mockingbird. And we think that all of these are important issues that black culture can account for without the original message of civil rights being lost, because there is no requirement that that message would be co-opted when a particular culture is adopted, right? We think therefore that we are clearly meeting any kind of matter coming out from OG.
Sure, we do agree that there are some people like Macklemore and Eminem that may have gone through some struggle to deserve that culture. However, will they ever in their life suffer the same kind of discrimination as a black rapper when there's a stereotype of an association that a black person is a rapper or black person associated to any negative value? Will that white person ever suffer that?
Okay, perfect. Right. We acknowledge that perhaps the white rapper may not face the same amount of discrimination. We don't think that is relevant because that black rapper can still come up and talk about his own message. The culture, as I've said again and again, is not linked to the message. The culture is a medium through which you can transmit different messages, which means that African American rapper can still talk about the, well, they don't, but like if Ice Cube were to come up and sing the song Fuck the Police, again, pardon my language, and talk about his struggles, that can still exist with Eminem or Macklemore singing about other struggles. They have not, again, given us any reason why these messages cannot coexist. In fact, we tell you that the African American message spread through rap will be better spread once their culture is normalized, which is the construct that we have brought to you again and again. The reason why currently Victorian ideology of white culture still exists is because the black culture is otherized. It's not accepted as normal in several fields. You can't go to a business meeting dressed in a tracksuit, wearing a chain, sitting down and talking with swag the way African Americans would do. Why? Because it's seen as something that is to be limited to a particular set of people and that it's not acceptable as normal. We tell you that when white people, white celebrities who have great social capital say that we don't buy into this white cultural dominance, we believe that everyone can choose their culture. We believe that black culture is a legitimate option and they opt into that. That's when you stop linking that culture to a form of discrimination against the people. That's when you stop saying that gangster rap is the reason why black people are evil and black people are causing crimes. And that's when you stop discriminating against black people in the long run, because you normalize their culture. You see them as individuals who you can relate to and who deserve equal respect. And for all those reasons, we're very proud to oppose.
Ladies and gentlemen, the colonization of America actually never ended. When we took their land, we told them that we were saving them from an uncivilized society. When we enslaved them, ladies and gentlemen, we told them we were saving them from their own inferiority. Now, we take every single thing that makes up their identity and who they are, we're telling them we're doing it for your sake as well. Ladies and gentlemen, the history of white guilt and white supremacy has been tainted with the feeling of superiority and the fact that a savior complex dominates the ability of white people to see clearly what they've done to individual minorities in society, and it permeates into how we treat minorities even today. We will have 3 extensions for you from closing government. Firstly, ladies and gentlemen, as nicely hinted by the opening opposition, we will be talking about why our appreciation of why a historical context to certain cultures is necessary in order for us to appreciate the discrimination that individuals face today. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, we'll talk about the majority groups that these individuals are opening opposition was talking about, and why even in the best case scenario of the opening opposition, it is worse off when the appreciation of certain cultures has an asymmetry between an individual that is white and an individual as black. So even if you have 50 Cent saying the same thing as Eminem, 50 Cent will always get less credit for it, ladies and gentlemen, because of the simple reason Eminem is saying it. And lastly, I will address the argument from the Deputy Leader of Opposition in regards to the detachment of the particular culture and why that's particularly harmful when we're talking about cultures that are essential to the discrimination of individuals. My rebuttals will be integrated. The first thing I want to talk about is about detachment of civil rights. The Leader of Opposition talked about why oftentimes these struggles and these cultures are disassociated with things like civil rights struggles and things that propagate equality. We think that's absolute nonsense, because oftentimes that the civil rights movement, when it comes to Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and what have you, ladies and gentlemen, fights for formal equality in the eyes of the law. The thing that culture is about, ladies and gentlemen, is the informal treatment of human beings in society, and whether you think that certain individuals are acceptable human beings to be occupying the same space as you. That means as much as you may have formal equality through all your civil rights movements, sometimes formal equality doesn't amount to jack in society if people still think it's unacceptable for you to exist in society. We've legislated civil rights for African Americans everywhere in the 50 states of America, but 27 states of America have Republicans controlling, continuously trying to harm their ability to access the right to vote, because they don't believe that they deserve to exist in the same space, because the opening opposition believes that it's okay for us to skim past the existential, essentialist characteristics of the African American community that is still being discriminated today under that side of the house. If we don't acknowledge that certain things, for example, our essentializing of the black female body, ladies and gentlemen, has roots in slavery, and therefore we should stop doing it today. Or the fact, ladies and gentlemen, that our essentializing of Native American culture as nice as accessories, because we wear dream catchers as earrings, ladies and gentlemen, are things that we used to discriminate Native Americans for, and we are taking it away from them today, ladies and gentlemen. We are fundamentally unable to intellectually internalize that we are discriminating them today. At best, under the side of opposition, we treat it as a frivolous issue rather than one that actively creates discrimination in the modern context. That's why we think that they need to be a little bit more responsive, though we agree that it was just a POI. So that's why the conclusion of that first issue, ladies and gentlemen, is that it is essential and critical for us to understand and not detach away the essential historic context of certain discrimination in the context of appreciating current discrimination, ladies and gentlemen. We think that kind of issue it falls on the government. Let's clarify the burdens in this debate. It is not our burden to prove that black people do it better. Arguably, they do in some circumstances. But in most circumstances, ladies and gentlemen, the government's burden in this debate is not to say that the culture will always attach itself to a particular issue. The issue is the ability of self-determination, ladies and gentlemen, of that particular culture. The fact that we don't need to rely on anybody else. We don't care if a white person gets it right sometimes, but the message is the ability for you to determine your own culture in that particular circumstance. So it doesn't matter if what they're saying is correct under that side of that. Sit down. But secondly, ladies and gentlemen, let's engage with the majority groups and why they provide stark contrast to African American communities. For every Macklemore they provide under that subhouse, there are 10 more Miley Cyruses that appropriate culture impolitely and inappropriately for several reasons. Number one, there is a massive ignorance as well as insensitivity when it comes to minority rights. This is something that's prevalent across societies. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, the way in which Miley Cyrus or even entertainers, ladies and gentlemen, describe these things doesn't come with advocacy. It often comes with certain with entertainment value. That means muddled up. in all the glitz, the glamour, as well as the production value in which you're producing that sort of message. But clearly, ladies and gentlemen, we think there's a greater likelihood of people not wanting to conform to active messaging, but rather people want to exploit culture for profit, ladies and gentlemen, because that's a lot easier for people to do. That means, ladies and gentlemen, that all the individuals that they are talking about, all the individuals that are well and good, ladies and gentlemen, are distinct minorities. The fact that you can only name 2 of these individuals, I can probably name massive numbers of rappers in which are individuals that appropriate culture for things like booty and things like drugs and alcohol, ladies and gentlemen, is because one is more profitable than the other. Because you don't need to intellectualize the latter, ladies and gentlemen. That's why it's inherently important. But before going further, I'll take closing.
So the problem is, either you have no representation in these mainstream culture, or you have representation by one who is accepted by dominant culture. Which paradigm would you prefer?
Ladies and gentlemen, we did not need we did not need straight people to act gay or act transsexual in order to make individuals accept that acting in a specific way when it comes to being flamboyant or not being flamboyant is acceptable. The point is, we do not need majority cultures to adopt it and whitewash history, ladies and gentlemen. We need to suck it up and accept history. We think normalization exists very clearly under our side of the house. We think that's perfectly acceptable. But it's already time. Sit down. But secondly, ladies and gentlemen, in a scenario where you have 50 Cent and Eminem on the same stage, we think 50 Cent will always get less attention. Why? Because we're talking about a society that's already predisposed, ladies and gentlemen, to think that white dominance is the norm in society. That means that you have a society that internalizes the message on your side of the house that not just that black people are saying something, but white people say it better because they are saying it under that side of the house. That's why the contrast that you provide under that side of the house gives black people a distinct disadvantage in this particular debate. Ladies and gentlemen, when you have essential characteristics that fundamentally contribute to the kind of discrimination that people face today in the modern context, detaching that culture and discrimination away from the people that suffer it is negligence of the worst kind. We are exceedingly proud to do this.
This was recognized a speech from the member of the government and invite opposition member to make his case. Here you go.
Mr. Speaker, the perks of being a minority is not just that you're oppressed, but also that your culture is dying every single day. Minorities feel sieged in all sorts of ways. They feel sieged in the government's kind of way, in which their culture is directly appropriated. But they also siege in other forms of ways. Things like, for example, their imminent realization that their culture is going extinct in the cases of Native American Indian culture or that really smaller minorities, but even in the sorts of bigger minorities like African American communities. That siege mentality is also there. It's not there because of appropriation, it is there because the culture is inescapably inferior or excluded from the dominant narrative that they can be accepted into. That the white people that all houses trying to condemn and all houses trying to put down still controls and pulls the lever of power within the dominant media, forms the majority of consumers and all the rest of that. That is the mentality in which your culture is necessarily confined to your people, at the same time put down by the dominant paradigm. Closing opposition tackles that particular mentality. We think every single comparison between all three houses given so far is striking the wrong comparison between a black person saying something and a white person saying something, and the audience giving equal credit to them as if we're actually judging the debate. This is not what happens in the status quo, right? We think that what happens in status quo is that black entertainers before Eminem, or a lot of other things, including Asians before the caricature representation of Fu Manchu in the 70s, or the representation of white actors as Asian characters, are getting much less cultural opportunities to even be on the mainstream and be on the spotlight, precisely because of commercialization. We have to admit that in the society, the media is necessarily commercialized. And what happens out of commercialization is a couple of things. First, these are unlikely to take risks to antagonize or dominant narrative, just seem to be too alien and too strange. That's why when we're trying to introduce black standards of beauty into the fashion circuit, for example, we used white models which possess exotic features of those mimicking African Americans. That's why when we're trying to integrate Chinese or Asian values, a culture into those things. We integrated in terms of particular sorts of food, into a particular culture practices practiced by white people, eventually following by Chinese people, because the people who are in charge of the commercialization process cannot take the risk of demanding jungle instead. Therefore, we think that in this particular paradigm, by this mechanism alone, the representation is not between whether we have a white person doing it and we have a black person doing it or whatever minority doing it. It's between having a white person doing it and opening a door and allowing the commercialization opportunity so that more and more people can be adopted into that culture, so that broader and more diffuse understanding of that culture is available, simply because of the ability of commercial firms to say, build on the fad, to say further explore something which people enjoy, such as in the case of rap, right? I can't believe nobody brought this out. But the reason why white people are even listening to rap is not in spite of Eminem, it's also that Eminem and other people like Vanilla Ice opened the door towards other further more niche source of black opportunities. And we regret to say this, but it's true that authentic black rap was seen as a niche and cocooned, pigeonholed culture which white people are not supposed to appreciate. That is a correct comparison in which all their understandings about how we can equally represent them in the national sphere and how that is wrong. No. Another problem is that their comparison of having them eat their vegetables, of what Midtown said, which is to understand history as it is, also has lots of limitations in terms because it directly confronts white people antagonistically, right? That is why for example, Barack Obama refuses to talk about race issues, representing already alienated, and this is just nothing but black justice crying again and white people antagonism. Yes.
But if there are some cultural identifiers that are deeply entrenched in the discrimination people face, how will detaching that and making it super popular do anything for the community that's being oppressed at the end of the day?
Which very nicely onto the second argument, which is the content of things on both sides, right? They say you can raise strong discriminatory, and that's bad on their side. The problem is, are they doing it right now? How are their culture being represented, and how is that reaction being represented in our model? Right? In their side, if something which is extremely offensive, or even mildly offensive discriminatory, such as my size Turkey, we saw the massive response on online media, on all sorts of civil society, on all sorts of mainstream media, the massive backlash against Miley Cyrus, and a longer critique of the cultural and historical backgrounds of twerking, for example, in literally every single mainstream representation of and reporting of that particular issue. All of that is a much better discourse and confronts people's racist attitudes and represents them, crystallizes racist attitudes and confronts them in a much better way than their side, which is to silence black activists because they can't crack through the Billboard's top 100, and also at the same time allowing pernicious racism to go unseen because it's not represented and massively critiqued in the mainstream media. We think that in these sort of ways, in a society like America, where racial justice is de facto the politically correct and the just option, most of the reactions against a sort of worst or bad sort of cultural appropriation will be massive, and we think that is a very good thing, and that actually brings out all the benefits in terms of the content of representation on their side. So finally, let's talk about what actually does to the people on the ground, right? We think that first of all, we think that in cases of the extreme minority, in cases of Native American Indians, we think that they do now feel less of a siege mentality, less of a sense of eventual extinction, precisely because at least some of their cultural legacy is being represented and called into the mainstream process, and part of their identity as part of the mainstream is a massive recognition to them. In cases of Black communities, right, all the things that we talk about, things like acceptance, things like confronting and critiquing racism out in the open, things like gradually allowing more and more Black artists and more authentic Black culture to be represented in the mainstream media, because white celebrities who do have commercial attentions get to represent them and open the door. All those things are infinitely good for Black people. We're very proud of those.
Mr. Chair realized that both opening and closing weren't able to show you how their normalization and their spotlighting of a minority culture would create a world where they are more respected, would not perpetuate this subtle and harmful discrimination, or in any way lift oppression. Because the best they were both able to do was create more attention to these minority races and their culture, but weren't able to properly analyze the different reactions you get from that more attention that you get, and whether or not this attention should come from dominant races, celebrities, and whether or not those representations actually create positive discourse or not. Because the from side opposition was this post-Miley Cyrus twerking discussion that happens, which means that the only form of discussion that they were able to show us was beneficial was in any way a criticism of the actions of those dominant races, which essentially means that most of what cultural appropriation do is inherently negative. So the only action of creating all of this post-Miley Cyrus reconciliation and all of those discourse is actually a way to curb the problem that already happened. It was a damage control article or a messaging that they wanted that happened afterwards, not necessarily a positive discourse that we want. Because we think that the divide that happened post-Miley Cyrus working was also negative in nature. So let's talk about a few questions. So thank you. Firstly, what kind of representations do they portray? Whether those representations are positive or negative, and whether or not your discourse was beneficial. Secondly, I'll talk about whether or not the attachment is harmful, and whether or not progress in society makes the cultural appropriation okay. And lastly, I'll talk about culture going extinct, and whether or not that's actually a good or a bad thing. Firstly, what kind of representation do they portray? Milsal told you very clearly from his speech that the representation that they portray are usually wholly ignorant and racially insensitive. Things like the twerking that Miley Cyrus does, things like all having backup dancers that are Black, most of those are done in extremely bad taste. That means that the only way you get any positive discourse is for people who are not ignorant and don't know about people who are ignorant and people who are not ignorant and realize the cultural problem in that portrayal. That means that the large majority of people who watch Miley Cyrus and which are the majority audience and fans of Miley Cyrus are people that would feel that the continuous perpetuation of the objectification of black women is something that's okay. That means that most of the twerking that you see young adults doing are all in bad taste, are in ignorance of all the discrimination that happens towards black women without even realizing that they're perpetuating a harmful racial stereotype. The problem is that for other people or people who are racist, who realize that what they're doing is perpetuating racial stereotypes, those people will then feel confirmed or feel that their narrative of being racist is okay because a large majority of society is doing the exact same thing. So inherently, by the ignorant portrayal of the women objectification that Miley Cyrus does, she inherently perpetuates racial stereotypes towards the most bigoted and most racist part of society who feel that their narratives are confirmed. That's how you create a worse off society under your side. No, thank you. Secondly, let's talk about this culture going extinct that closing opposition wanted to talk about. Because they say that the only way for you to insert your culture into the mainstream society is to ride upon mainstream dominant races. We think that's a bad thing. We think we needed to, without doing this, you can start a trend of actually using Asian actors to portray the discrimination that Asians feel. You can start using black actors or black models to portray the type of body types that they usually have. We think that that's a lot better compared to riding on this white people who are riding to show your culture. Why this is bad is what it does is actually why this hierarchical status that happens in society that creates a different hierarchy for which white people feel inherently superior compared to other people, other races in society. Before that,
because of the representation of white models in terms of black sex beauty, black models are getting increasingly higher. How is that whitewashing if you're increasing black representation because of something of Western?
Firstly, that's inherently a lie because using white women to portray black women beauty standards didn't make black models more needed or make them more popular. It just shows how much we don't need black models in order to sell clothes towards black people. We think that's inherently a lie. And secondly, we think that what you do is that show that the standard of beauty must always start and end with white people, and that's inherently harmful as well. We think that what you do is you don't solve problems, neither do you solve the lack of visibility that black people face in society that we feel are very important. So what we think they fail to realize in this debate is that a racist will not appreciate the black person. A racist will say that the white person always do it better, and the only thing they do under their side is confirm that particular narrative. But what are we okay with on our side? We are okay with things like group of celebrities, white celebrities, supporting causes. For example, getting behind certain causes, funding or activism. Those kind of things are things that we are okay with. The reason why we're okay with that because it's always attached with a positive signaling or a positive message into what they're trying to do. That means that what we don't support is the ignorant appropriation of culture. What we support is your ability to tell people that it's okay. That means that there are various ways in which we can achieve what closing opposition want to do without appropriating their culture. There are various ways in which celebrities are able to do this without doing what closing opposition wants them to do. So in conclusion, what you have under their side is a lot of perpetuation of discrimination as well as racial stereotypes that exist without even realizing that they're doing those kinds of things, confirming all those bias, those individuals that are inherently racist. We're extremely proud.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
opposing opposition's line that if you can't see a problem and you can't protect a culture, you basically cannot learn more about a culture if you know nothing about it, if you don't actually care about it. This is the fundamental line taken by closing opposition. I'm going to show you why we take to this debate through three main clashes. Firstly, what is the utility of culture? What actually constructs culture? Secondly, is integration the best way to go for minority culture? And thirdly, if yes, how to actually best achieve integration? So firstly, let's take a look at what actually is culture, right? Because nobody really talks about what is the constituents of culture, what is the important utility of culture, right? We think that culture is actually twofold. Firstly, we think it is an internal thing, meaning it is something, an identity that you share among people you identify with, people you identify as part of yourself. And secondly, and most importantly about this debate, we think culture is more importantly an expression of that identity in terms of how it constructs and sits with the outside world. Why is that so important in terms of today's debate? We think it's actually especially important for people whose culture is extremely marginalized, right? We think that the fact that there's an external facet of culture means that, like language, it's something that has to be used and utilized and has to interact with the outside world for it to have some sort of utility, have some sort of importance, to actually be propagated and perpetuated towards the actually your future generations, or in terms of the outside world, in terms of how they actually perceive you. So how is that important in understanding and defining whether or not integration is the best way to go for minority culture? So thank you. It's that when we actually take a look at what proposition gave us, which was basically that, we should allow them to self-determine, we don't want whitewashing, we think they should be autistic and shut themselves away from the outside world, and actually not risk them being co-opted into mainstream media. We think that what this does not do is that it does not break any sort of barriers, it does not increase any sort of understanding or actually increase any sort of social will. So thank you. So actually come to terms with actually learn about this culture, right? Because we think that at the end of the day, if that culture is kept separate and actually insular from mainstream culture, there's no way for them to have any sort of leeway into mainstream media. So thank you, in terms of understanding or critiquing how people react to that kind of culture, right? Because essentially nothing is happening. All the unique benefits we gave you in closing opposition, thank you, is that even if this sort of exposure, even if this sort of representation is done badly, we think what actually happens in the very worst case scenario is that you have more confrontation, you have more critique, you have more discourse generated. And the unique and the most fundamental thing about a discourse is that we think what actually happens is that the extreme races won't actually change because they're beyond any point of redemption. But what we're actually talking about in this statement is the moderns, right? The people who don't actually know anything, the people who thought, thank you, that twerking was fine, until the point where Miley Cyrus started twerking, and all these BuzzFeed articles started popping out in their Facebook newsfeed, and they started reading about, thank you, about how twerking is actually a historical, extremely harmful thing, and why they shouldn't be actually critiquing this so much anymore, because it's actually an extremely racist thing to actually do in mainstream media. No, thank you. We think this is a fundamental good thing. In the worst case scenario, in which case the minority culture is actually portrayed in a bad light, right? That is fundamentally why we think integration is the best choice for minorities. But moving on from that, how do you actually best achieve integration? Before I move on to this clash, go.
If continued existence of these cultures comes at the cost of taking away the power from minority groups to define those cultures and perpetuates and normalize the discrimination they currently face, how and when will it ever benefit those minority groups?
I think that's actually a false comparison to draw, when the correct comparison should be that they receive no representation, no scrutiny, nothing in the spotlight at all, compared to some sort of spotlight that incrementally leads to more scrutiny and leads to more progress, which is exactly what I can talk about. So thank you for that, POA. No, thank you for answering your partner's POI. So how do you actually best achieve integration, right? Because basically what they gave us was that, historical context is actually necessary and extremely important in terms of understanding what minority culture is, right? But we actually told you the priority we're dealing with here is not that, if you portray something poorly, people will actually hold on to that understanding and carry it till the day they die, right? We don't think that is the correct comparison to draw. Which we think is more likely is that when mainstream media actually looks at these historical and actually does not have any sort of interest in this sort of historical bias or historical prejudices, right? when they don't see the problem, they're not going to think about it because they have no social else to these two worlds together. No, thank you. And we think that when you actually increase the sort of representation, it is not actually whitewashing, right? Whitewashing means that dominant, no thank you, that culture dominantly continues to be white. What we think is that when you actually increase your representation into mainstream media, it is no longer whitewashing, it is merely wider representation, no thank you, into mainstream media. And what we think is actually happens under that is that you actually have more bargaining power because Black artists actually are more likely to be represented and seen in mainstream media. Allow these problems to come to light. Therefore, the fundamental reason why we think it is so important. For all these reasons, extremely proud to oppose.
Thank you, team, for an excellent debate. Just to wait outside.